Due to sanctions imposed by the US and EU on Russia, the aggressor state is increasingly replacing American components in its weaponry with alternatives from other countries, particularly China. For the first time, components of Indian origin have also been identified. Ukrainian intelligence analyzed 6 types of weapons used by the Russian army in its war against Ukraine and discovered around 200 new components.
Among these are the CRP antenna used in Russia's Shahed drones, the North Korean KN-24 ballistic missile, a computer from the Ha-47 Kinjal missile, and drones such as the Supercam S-350 Gerbena and Zala. New CRP antennas for the Gerань-2 drone were found to contain only 2 American-made chips. This indicates Russia's effort to reduce dependence on components from countries that imposed sanctions. Main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Telegram.
According to intelligence, in 2025, Russia began using new shielded antennas with Chinese language markings in its Shahed drones used to strike Ukrainian cities. In one such antenna out of 15 components, only 2 were American. The rest were mostly Chinese.
These include transceivers, signal generators, converters, and other microchips. For instance, the main chip of the CRP antenna responsible for analyzing input signals and deciding which to filter is manufactured by the Beijing Microelectronics Technology Institute, Main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Telegram.
Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, China has publicly attempted to maintain a neutral stance and called for negotiations. However, U.S. intelligence has repeatedly reported that, starting in spring 2024, Beijing has increased military support for Moscow. This includes sharing intelligence, supplying optics for military vehicles, rocket fuel, machinery for tank production, and other goods. In September 2024, it was revealed that Russia had begun manufacturing attack drones in China. As a result, on October 17, 2024, the U.S. imposed its first sanctions on Chinese companies assisting Russia in drone production. At the end of February 2025, European Commission spokesperson Anouar El-Anouni stated that, without Chinese support, Russia would not be able to continue its aggressive war against Ukraine with the same intensity.
China is the largest supplier of dual-use goods and sensitive components supporting Russia's military-industrial base, and these have been found on the battlefield. In practice, these items serve military purposes. We are seriously concerned by reports that Chinese companies are supplying parts for combat drones used by Russia, or even fully assembled drones. Anouar El-Anouni, EU spokesman for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, quoted by Ukrinform.
It's worth recalling that last week, the UK outlet The Telegraph reported that since the start of peace talks in Riyadh, the aggressor state has launched nearly 5,000 drone strikes on Ukraine. In January alone, the peak number of drone attacks exceeded 3,000. Despite overwhelming evidence, Russia continues to blame Ukraine for violating the energy truce. U.S. President Donald Trump condemned Russia's bombings of Ukraine.
We're talking to Russia. We'd like them to stop. I don't like the bombing. The bombing goes on, and every week thousands of young people are being killed.
Earlier, on April 2nd, the U.S. imposed new tariffs on exports to the United States from 180 countries, including China and Ukraine. A 10% customs duty was applied to Ukrainian goods and a 54% duty to Chinese goods. However, Russia was not included in the list. The White House stated that this decision was made because of the ongoing peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine.
There's obviously an ongoing negotiation with Russia and Ukraine, and I think the president made the decision not to conflate the two issues. It doesn't mean that Russia, the fullest of time, is going to be treated wildly different than every other country.
Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that the U.S. is close to tightening sanctions against Russia in response to the Kremlin's violations of the energy truce. Zelenskyy emphasized that he believes sanctions could pressure Russia toward a ceasefire. Reported by Yulia Hernovska, UATV News.
There are no requests from Western businesses to return to Russia. In February 2025, Russian propagandists began actively spreading rumors about the imminent return of Western companies and brands to the Russian Federation. However, in reality, no one plans to return. Moreover, the list of companies wanting to exit Russia continues to grow, as stated by the Ministry of Finance of the Russian Federation, Ivan Chebasco.
According to him, this week the government reviewed requests from 4 foreign companies that wished to leave Russia: Shebeskov pointed out that the number of companies leaving the country has decreased, and most of them are not widely known, but the flow of applications continues. From the Moscow Times publication.
In February of this year, another large European company, a French infrastructure holding, left the Russian market. Since February 2022, nearly 500 foreign companies have exited the market, according to the Kyiv School of Economics. Additionally, almost 1,500 companies have rescued their presence in the Russian Federation. Some businesses sold their assets, while others completely abandoned them. Previously, the deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia claimed that the country didn't expel anyone, but returning will not be easy for them.
Medvedev emphasized that Russia did not kick out foreign companies. They left themselves under pressure from their governments. Therefore, if in the end they still do not want to return, then to hell with them. No big deal. And those who decide to do so should understand that doing so will not be easy. They will have a separate conversation, he added. From the Moscow Times publication on Telegram.
At the beginning of March, journalists from the Bell reached out to representatives of corporations that, according to the Kyiv School of Economics, were the largest by revenue among those who left the Russian market after the start of the war. 21 companies responded, including leading manufacturers of automobiles and electronics, oil service companies, and chemical industrial enterprises. Not a single positive response was received. All of them stated that they do not plan to return to Russia.
The repurchase of assets through an option will only be considered in the event of fundamental and long-term changes in the geopolitical situation. At this point, we do not see that happening, stated Henkel and Nissan for the Bell publication.
When it became clear that Western businesses had no intention of returning, Putin moved to threats.
Companies that left under domestic political pressure and sold their assets at a throwaway price should not be allowed to repurchase for the same small sum, Putin said. He also cautioned Russian business that Western sanctions on Russian individuals and businesses were not temporary, and that even if they were eased, other obstacles to doing business would be thrown up. From Reuters publication.
Due to Western restrictions and significant investments in the military-industrial complex, economists are observing a crisis in all sectors of the aggressor country's economy. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Kremlin has spent 20 trillion rubles on weapons production and contractor payments. As a result, the budget deficit has reached 10 trillion rubles, and to cover it, the government has used 2/3 of the National Welfare Fund's available funds.
8 триллионов.
8 trillion they paid out in the first 2 months of the year. Last year, it was 6. And what is 8 trillion rubles is about 40% of the pre-war budget of the 21st year. They already spent half of Russia's pre-war budget in the first 2 months. War requires a huge increase in spending all the time. At the same time, oil revenues are shrinking. Because of the sanctions, oil revenues were noticeably lower.
Россию в этом году ждут большие увольнения.
Russia is facing large-scale layoffs this year, but these layoffs will mainly be in the civilian economy. The military won't be laid off, but civilians will be, for various reasons. Firstly, many companies will go bankrupt, and secondly, Russian production is being moved abroad. Instead of import substitution, people have started leaving Russia. It's a strange process, but it's noticeable. First, furniture makers left, and then shoemakers followed. They are going to Asia, where it's easier to produce and where it's simpler to get raw materials and components.
Western sanctions have also hit the digital ruble project, which the central bank had been working on for over 4 years. The third form of the national currency was supposed to serve as an alternative to paper banknotes and non-cash rubles. The regulator had planned to introduce the digital ruble in the summer of 2025. However, the launch has been postponed indefinitely due to technical problems. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Yulia Granovskaya, UATV News.